Hello, I'm Alex Safian, Associate Director of Camera. This is the first in a series of special briefings in the wake of the horrific terrorist attacks in Israel. Helping us to understand what happened and what is likely to happen next is Professor Efraim Inbar, who has been a good friend of ours for many years. Efraim is the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He was the founding director of BESA, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, which he led for its first 23 years. And he is an emeritus professor of political studies at Bar-Ilan University. He's been a visiting professor at many top-tier institutions, including Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, and Boston University. Professor Inbar got his master's and PhD at the University of Chicago. He is the author of 5 books and many articles in peer-reviewed journals, and he is a leading expert on political and strategic issues relating to Israel and the wider Middle East. And finally, he also served as a paratrooper in the IDF. Professor Inbar will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we will move to Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And now, Efraim.
Thank you, Alex. Shalom to everybody from Jerusalem. I think that we are all shocked. And I'll say a few words about the importance of this war. We took a terrible beating. And this is one reason why it is so important. For the first time, Israeli settlements were invaded by terrorists or by enemy forces since 1948. Also, the magnitude of the attack is great. We lost 1,200 people so far, and we are still counting. Over 2,700 wounded. And so far, about 5,000 missiles were launched to Israel, which is not very different from previous, engagements with Hamas. What we suffered most is a loss of deterrence. In the Middle East, we have to show strength. If you don't have deterrence, you invite aggression. I think that everybody understands that our internal debates have weakened our deterrence. Actually, the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security warned in July that this is an image we are projecting, an image of weakness, and this might bring about a war. And it came. We have to win this war in a decisive way in order to restore deterrence. The peace process is predicated upon a strong Israel. Nobody in the Middle East became a Zionist or a Philo-Semite. We have peace with Arab partners because we are strong, and they see us as a potential barrier to Iranian hegemony, particularly when the Americans seem to be going out of the region. So it's very important that in this war we'll win, and we'll win in a very decisive, well understood fashion. The goal of the war was enunciated. I think that the general mood in Israel, as well as declarations emanating from the government, are clear. Israel intends to annihilate the military capabilities of Hamas. We tried to contain Hamas with limited actions. It failed. Now we have to go inside into the Gaza Strip to conquer it, reconquer it, and to clean the area of Hamas, which means a very lengthy operation. We are talking about months, not days, not weeks. This cannot be done from air. Air power can exact a lot of destruction, a lot of pain, but we have to do more. We have to go from house to house, to check every tunnel, to catch all Hamas soldiers and leadership. And this will take time, and it will be costly. I think Israelis, that most of them have some military experience because they've been in the IDF, understand them. So this is what we are facing. A decision to go inside with a large-scale ground operation has not been made yet, or at least I don't know about. I think that maybe the new government, which I'll say a few words about later, will have to make this decision. And I just want to share with you, this evening, the chief of the Israeli Air Force announced that we have a long list of all people, of all Hamas guys that participated in the attack. This is a result of the inquiries, investigations made by the Shabbat, the security services, of the prisoners that were caught. So we know who is to be caught, and it will not be easy. They are hiding, they are running away, but we'll get to them. The first stage of the operation, of the war, which was decided upon, state of war, is to clean the area along the border, the Gaza border, of terrorists. We largely succeeded. It's not fully clean yet. Today, a terrorist was apprehended and killed. So there may be still terrorists in that area that are hiding. We know many of them came, maybe you've heard about it, with water and dates in order to make sure they can stay longer in Israel in order to accomplish their missions. In parallel, the government decided on the legal framework, which is war. This means, first of all, that the government can cut bureaucratic procedures. It has an economic dimension, providing insurance and other things to the citizens. We have many social mechanisms to cushion the effect of warfare. They will be activated, and there was certain benefits to a variety of citizens. This is a formal decision that does not necessarily affect the fighting. What about Iran? We are very disappointed from the American reluctance to recognize the role of Iran in this Hamas attack. Hamas is funded partly by Iran. Iran trains Hamas members in Iran. Iran smuggled weapons, missiles into the Gaza Strip. Iran transferred technology, missile technology, in order to enable Hamas to build a domestic missile manufacturing capability. Not only that, about a month ago, at the beginning of September, there was a meeting that everybody knew about between Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iranian delegates in Lebanon, Beirut. And I'm sure that on the agenda was cooperation, coordination on an attack on Israel. After all those parties have a common ideological goal: to destroy the Jewish state. And they are not bashful. They say it openly. It's incredible that somebody wants to destroy a member of the international community, but they are saying it. What is also interesting that they are compared, Hamas is compared to Daesh. And President Biden made it quite clear that they are enemy of Western civilization. They are the enemy of humanity. What about their sponsor? There is quiet on this issue. Will we see an international coalition going after Hamas or Iran, just like after Daesh? I doubt it. Iran actually is more dangerous than Daesh. It's a state that does other bad things, like helping the Russians in Ukraine, like spreading narcotics and fake medicines. They are a danger to humanity. For some unexplained reason, America is not sharing this view. Will the current conflict become a multi-front war? It is already a multi-front. We see already Hezbollah shooting at Israeli targets, truly at a small scale. We are concentrating huge amount of forces also in the north to try to deter Hezbollah from further intensifying the military actions against us. So far, we've seen no intensification in the activity of terrorist cells in the West Bank. We don't know what will happen there. So far, we have not seen any unusual activity among Israeli Arabs, which could be another form. But we may face all those fronts at once. This is what makes this war also very important for us. A few words about the domestic arena. The mood of the Israelis is, of course, of shock. And how could we manage to fail in such a grand way? Also, we are enraged at the atrocities that were divulged, at a later stage. At the same time, Israelis are determined, and we see great determination on part of all parts of Israeli society. For example, we see 120% or 130% of reservists going to their units. It's more than 100 because there are certain veterans that are already exempt from their units, but they still come. I think also the general mood is we failed, we have a lot of questions, we'll leave them for after the war. In the meantime, we have to be united and to fight this war on Hamas. Indeed, due to pressure from the people, we see the emergence of a national emergency government, which was sworn a few minutes ago. This national emergency government is, of course, good for the morale of the people. It's good for the reservists, for the military, particularly after we've seen 9 months of domestic problems. It's a good feeling to be united. Also, this government, the new government, has more experience in running a war than the previous government. In the previous government, only very few had the experience how to manage a war. Now we have generals like Gantz, Chief of Staff, former Chief of Staff, former Chief of Staff Eisenkot, that can be helpful in managing the war. I don't think that the new cabinet will change many things in the planning of the IDF. But maybe they'll be able, due to their experience, to improve those plans. At the international level, we've seen much support. Israelis are not used to have such warm support abroad. And for the time being, Israelis feel good about it, particularly by the demonstration of support of the American government. We've heard several times emotional addresses by President Biden. We've seen an aircraft carrier being sent to our region for deterring Hezbollah and Iran from joining the fray. Frankly, I'm not sure that America deters those actors. Hezbollah said already that they are not afraid of American bombers. Obviously, Americans will not fight side by side with Israel. We want to fight our own wars. But we should be aware that this current international support from Europe, from most of the civilized world, is temporal. We in Israel know there is always a political clock ticking when Israel initiates a war, or when Israel goes to. We should expect that some pictures will come out of Gaza of the destruction. I'm sure Hamas is very good at orchestrating a propaganda campaign showing the misery of the Palestinians there. And then there will be calls for a ceasefire, even before Israel achieves its goals. Interestingly, President Biden and Blinken as well urged Israel not to cause too much civilian damage. This is a prelude to a demand to stop fighting at a certain point. I don't know when it will be. To some extent, I believe that we wasted time. We are now on the 6th day of the war. I don't know how much more time will the international community allow us. We can play games with them, of course. But we might be sorry for not moving into an offensive at an earlier stage. And I must also answer the question, what next? Let's assume we go in, we clean the area of Hamas, military infrastructure, of military manpower. What's next? Israel has no appetite to stay in Gaza. Israel has no reason to try to manage the lives of, we don't know exactly, 1.5, 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. And then we plan to leave. What will happen after we leave? We don't know exactly. One possibility is that Hamas, that is a very popular movement within the Palestinian society, will return. Actually, Hamas, if we have elections, according to polls taken in September, Hamas wins an election in the Palestinian entity. Now, after their initial successes, I think they will be even more popular. So basically, what we have to make sure in terms of the international understanding, in terms of the Israeli domestic understanding, that after we finish the job, we need freedom of action to continue to clean the area of Hamas. The same type of freedom of action that we have in the West Bank. In the West Bank, we go into a refugee camp in Jenin, Nablus, pick up the bad guys, take them into prisons, they don't become better citizens. And this is part of mowing the grass. We'll continue to mow the grass. It is a pity we didn't do it more frequently until Hamas grew into this monster. So we'll have to do it more often. But this is what waits for us. And we should be clear-headed. We'll not get peace. The struggle will continue. And I hope that the Israeli society, which has shown great strength, great social solidarity, will be able to withstand the difficult struggle that are ahead of us. Thank you, and I'm ready to take questions. We don't hear you.
Set now. Thank you very much, Efraim, for that very interesting briefing. We'll be going through some of these questions, but I wanted to ask you one question in particular, triggered by something that I saw on your institute's website. I'm going to read a passage from an article from a few days ago, and I'm sure you'll recognize it. I'd like you to comment on it. Here's what it says. The IDF must also urgently recruit its best field commanders for the campaign. The order of the day is the need to mobilize all command resources on the ground. IDF field formations have been neglected for many years. It is imperative to place at the head of the forces at all levels of command, including division commanders and brigade commanders, the best former commanders of the IDF, even if they are of advanced age. One can think of many commanders imbued with determination who would immediately report to war. Could you comment on that?
It's written by one of our researchers, Professor Gabi Sibone, who is also a colonel in reserve. He was the head of Sayeret Golan, one of our best units. And I think he's right. We have neglected the land forces. We have not invested enough in training, in equipment. And we've seen those problems already in 2006. And unfortunately, in recent years, this unfortunate process continued. And we may have difficulties in this campaign because of this neglect. Not only that, if we are talking about the military, we need a larger army. Simply, our military is too small for the challenges that are surrounding us. We are a small nation with superpower challenges. And we have to make sure that more people are brought into the army and also not to shorten the service, by 4 months, which is a mistake. This is what the economists told us, that it's better for the economy, but it's not good for security.
There are questions about if you do go in and succeed at basically dismantling the infrastructure of Hamas. Obviously, you're not going to kill all of the Hamas members, but dismantling the infrastructure and killing many of the leadership and the brigade level, et cetera. What about the day after? What do you see as the day after?
First of all, it's not my problem immediately. It is a Palestinian problem. They are not very good at governing themselves. You see it in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is losing control over parts of the territories we gave them to govern. By the way, this is not only a Palestinian problem. The issue of not having a monopoly over use of force is something that we see in other Arab countries like Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Yemen. So there is this part of their current political culture, and they have a problem, and I don't think we can help them. Any Israeli involvement, with one side of the political Palestinian spectrum delegitimizes. So we don't want to be there. Gaza is a big mess, and maybe as a result of this war, we'll see even greater emigration from there. There are many people emigrating. Rabin once said that he wants to see Gaza in the sea. He could say those things. Nowadays, we cannot say those things.
There are questions about this issue of the supposed Egyptian warning to Israel 3 days beforehand. Could you comment on that? Some people in the Q&A are saying that Bibi knew about this and he should resign because he ignored it, etc. Could you comment on this question of Egypt's supposed warning?
First of all, it was denied by the Israeli government. It was denied by the Egyptian government, which also doesn't surprise me. They don't want to be seen as cooperating with Israel. I have nothing to say about, I don't have any firm knowledge about it. I think that we'll have to investigate the whole issue of strategic surprise after the war. And we'll find the responsible people for it. Probably they will pay a price, a certain price for their mistake. I can say, however, that one source of the surprise was the conception that Hamas is deterred by us, that they are afraid of us, and this obviously was wrong.
There are some questions also about this claim that there was a cyber attack, and this explains why the IDF was so slow to respond to what was going on. I haven't seen any news reports really about that. I've just seen it on Twitter and on the web. Do you have any comment on that? Is there any truth to that?
I don't know. However, I can say that Hamas attack was very sophisticated. They blinded us from the very beginning, and also decided to attack first the division headquarters, and actually paralyzed our communication system from there. And this was also one of the reasons why the IDF reacted in a rather slow way to the slaughter that happened along the border.
It's hard to understand, though, why there was no evidence. I mean, the IDF dropped special forces from the Air Force, not a large detachment, to try to engage the terrorists. But why were there not Apache helicopters in the sky? It's kind of hard to understand. Taking out those white Toyota trucks, they would have been sitting ducks.
First of all, there were some helicopters in there, but the main problem was that the IDF was not able to read the situation. Simply, we didn't know what was happening. And it's a problem. It was a simultaneous attack on many outposts, and the commanders were killed, their deputies were killed in the first wave, and this was a problem.
That was in the Gaza division, or what used to be called the Gaza division, but...
The Gaza division, I'm sure you visited it, many of the missions, American missions go to this place, and one problem was also that along the barrier, there was no real killing zone. There is no effective barrier. An effective barrier must have a killing zone, and we were merciful. We liked them to demonstrate close to the barrier, and this was also, I think, a big mistake.
I'll ask a question here, and then I'll go back to the list. There have been recent reports of very, very bad economic situation in Egypt. Major Egyptian banks have banned Egyptian citizens from using their debit cards outside the country because there's a terrible a foreign reserve shortage in Egypt right now. And without foreign reserves, of course, you can't buy wheat, you can't buy oil, you can't buy anything that they need from abroad. And so they're banning the use of debit cards. In that situation, do you think there is a chance? Egypt has turned down, the idea of them taking some responsibility for Gaza in the last 40 years or so, or 30 years. But at this point, if there were massive Saudi aid to Egypt to go in as a protector of Gaza and rebuild it with Egyptian companies and Palestinian workers, and massive aid to Egypt's coffers in general, do you think there's a chance that Egypt would be willing to go in there on a temporary, quote unquote, basis as the rest
wants to be in charge of Gaza? Let's face it, nobody really wants. I have a son who is serving in the Israeli embassy in Brussels, and he tells me the worst fear of the Europeans is that the war will will bring about wave of immigrants that will come to Europe. So the Europeans have a clear interest of the war ending as soon as possible. They don't want Gazans. Nobody wants Gazans. So I don't know, maybe you can try to bribe the Egyptian president with many millions.
Many billions, yeah.
I don't think the Saudis want the Egyptians to take care of that. They prefer the Israelis to take care of it.
But Israel's not going to stay there. They would like to see the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas eradicated. And if the Egyptians were willing to go in there and rebuild at the same time as Egyptian security took care of what was left of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they might like that. And it might also allow the Abraham Accords to proceed a lot sooner.
I think everybody in the region understands that we have a clear interest in fighting the Muslim Brotherhood, all its offshoots, and they prefer us to do the dirty job.
What about the hostages? There are questions about the hostages. Should Israel be willing to engage in a trade, not on the level of shalit, but say a more reasonable trade of Hamas terrorist prisoners versus the hostages? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, the hostages is a humanitarian problem, and it's the secondary consideration, in my view. And of course, if there is an offer for an exchange of prisoners at a reasonable price, and I agree, not the shalit price, of course, Israel has a duty to try to bring back some of the hostages, particularly the women, the elderly, the children, civilians. I don't think such a offer is on the table. What we hear is an offer made via Qatar to have an exchange following a ceasefire. And Israel is not ready for a ceasefire.
Do you think, I mean, you've said a few words about this already, but there is criticism in Israel beforehand of the idea of security fences and electronic gizmos and the policy of quiet for quiet, even the policy of defensive weapons like Iron Dome, creating a defensive and somewhat passive mindset. Could you comment on that?
No, there are two separate issues. First of all, quiet for quiet is a mistake. In my view, it's an attempt to contain, not to have explosions, and basically you give Hamas time to train, to build for a force build-up, to produce more missiles, and this is the wrong policy. Other things, we are too much dependent upon technology. And technology is very important. You can do a lot of things with technology, but low tech can be very effective. And we've seen in this attack that low-tech is very effective. A barrier, we should remember, we can build a barrier, we spend a lot of money on it, but every barrier has weaknesses. And there is no perfect, we've seen it in 73, the line that fell. And we didn't learn the lesson. Of course, we developed wonderful technology of finding tunnels that we sell everywhere, but it's technology is not the key, barriers are not the key. They help. It's a helpful measure, but we should remember that this type of barriers can be overcome. And every technology has its weakness.
There's a question of resilience. Will people leave Israel as a result of this? How much will this weaken Israel over the long term?
I don't think many people will leave Israel as a result of the initial successes of Hamas. Basically, Israel is a wonderful place to live. It has a high standard of living. There is social solidarity. The quality of life in Israel is better than in most Western countries. We have a healthy economy. We make babies, which is a sign of a healthy society. So there may be people that cannot take it, will leave. But I think most of the Israelis will stay put. And we shouldn't forget that many Israelis can relocate easily. They have the know-how. They are sought all over the world, particularly the high-tech sector. And they stay put. There is something in Israel that makes them stay here. We are nationalists. Nationalism is not always a term well-liked in the West nowadays, but we are nationalists. We like our country. Also, there is already a large population that is native. They don't know anything else. This is, immigrants can move, but people stay put. I think Israelis are attached to the country, to the state, and they will overcome this terrible tragedy, which is not over. We still have a difficult war ahead of us, which has not started.
There are questions being raised about the role of Gantz in the past as chief of staff, promising a few years ago when he was defense minister that the wall would be complete security for the people in the Gaza envelope. I mean, there are pictures of him posing with a smile next to not the wall, security fence. Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff, was the chief of Southern Command. Do you think these people are going to face a lot of criticism in the commission of inquiry that is sure to follow this?
Of course, but in the meantime, they are there and we must keep them there. I don't think it's good to bring new horses in the middle of the war. So after the war, we'll settle the accounts, the political, the professional accounts. But for the time being, this is what we have, and with that, as we say in Israel, with that we go to war.
Well, Rumsfeld said you go to war with the army you have, which is true. Right. There were questions about the issue of proportionality in warfare. Perhaps you could explain to people again, though I don't know how anyone has not already heard this, but it's always good to re-explain. What is the meaning of the term proportionality in the laws of war?
The term proportionality says that the price you may exact is proportionate to the threat you are facing. And if we face a threat to, next to the border, maybe 1 million Israelis, so if we kill less than 1 million Palestinians, it's proportionate.
And one example I like to use is after Pearl Harbor. I don't know how many, 3,000 Americans were killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor, something like that. The laws of war don't say that we were obligated to stop attacking Japan in response once we had killed 3,000 of them, right? Because it could have said, okay, you killed 3,000, we killed 3,000. So now we do any more, we're violating international law. It's disproportional. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. And I don't think any Americans, at least, would fall for that argument once it's explained that way. That is not what proportional means. And yet we're going to hear this over and over again, of course. There's no question that already they're saying that the bombing campaign that Israel's engaging in is disproportionate, it's collective punishment, etc. Just something we will have to face.
Listen, I don't think that, I was asked at the BBC, for example, what do I say about hungry or thirsty Palestinian children? And I asked the interviewer whether the British and the Americans during World War II were worried about the children of the Nazis. She blew her. She was very offended. She was very offended and lost her calm. But I don't think we have any moral duty to feed the enemy. It's no. In the first place, we shouldn't have supplied water and electricity to Gaza. And now, finally, we are correcting our mistake. They don't deserve. They are bad neighbors. They are bad. What do you do with bad neighbors? Do you go, we are not Christians, so don't turn the other cheek.
You do turn the other cheek. You're the only country in the world that turns the other cheek.
Well, not always.
Yeah, you're the only, yeah. Just an important note is that Gaza exists because it is an oasis. It sits on top of a large aquifer. So when Gallant and others say no more water, they're talking about a very small amount of Israeli water, 5 million cubic meters, maybe a little bit more per year, that flow into northern Gaza, Gaza City and northern areas of Gaza. And by the way, it's in the Kisufim pipeline. Kisufim was one of the kibbutzes that was attacked and where people were killed. The electricity that goes into Gaza, I think, goes through transmission lines that go through Israeli communities that have been attacked in the past. And in fact, Gaza has sometimes lost electricity because of rockets that did damage to the transmission lines. And then they start screaming because there's no electricity. Meanwhile, they're still firing rockets. And so the Israelis who have to go up into the transmission lines to try to fix them are getting attacked as they're doing it by the people who are screaming about no electricity. It's truly an absurd situation. And yet you hear from the Europeans, et cetera, about how you're cutting off electricity. They have their own electricity. If they didn't prepare enough diesel fuel to run their own generators, whose fault is that, right?
I fully agree.
Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. Do you think there's a chance that Egypt would even set up, say, tent cities over the border temporarily for refugees to leave? Or I wouldn't call them refugees, but for Gazans to leave during the fighting.
When we made peace, the peace treaty with Egypt, we tried to change the status of the refugees, and they refused. And they insisted that part of the refugee camp will be on the Israeli side. They were not willing to accept even one refugee, which again doesn't surprise me. And I doubt very much if the Egyptians, who, as you mentioned, have little money, will spend any penny on Palestinian refugees. So we are stuck with a problem. Let's face it. And there is no hope whatsoever that the rich Arab countries will shed, a tear and some money for the Palestinians.
Question is raised about if Israel is taking apart Hamas, taking apart Islamic Jihad, which are both very closely allied with Iran, there'll be tremendous pressure on Iran and Hezbollah to at least show, some support. Can Iran really just sit back and watch their allies get destroyed? That makes them look very bad. That they triggered this, but then they do nothing to help them. It makes them look very weak.
We should remember that Iranis are Persians and Gazans are Arabs. And from what we know in Syria, they are ready to fight until the last Syrian, until the last Arab. And they are very sophisticated. Until now, very little Persian blood was spilled in Syria and other places. And again, I don't think they will be shocked if some Arabs lose their life.
True, but their support for Hamas, et cetera, is to try to gain influence in the Arab world as well. This makes them look bad. And also important to note, you say Iran is Persian. Yes, the leadership is Persian. The population, I think, at this point is probably majority non-Persian, which is a big problem for Iran that people have to pay attention to. That there are a lot of restive populations, some of whom are very friendly to Israel, like the Azeris, et cetera. So Iran has its own problems. They're hardly 10 feet tall. They have very, very serious problems, which should be exploited. Do you think Israel has the capability to help create unrest in Iran, and should they do so? After all, if the streets of Israel are not quiet, why should the streets of Tehran be quiet? This is something I've never understood.
I think that we should be very careful with political engineering in the Middle East. I think that we should remember we are a small nation with limited means. The Americans were not very successful in changing the Middle East. They invaded Iraq, they invaded Afghanistan, and I don't think that those countries essentially became any nicer after the Americans left. So we tried once in Lebanon, we failed miserably, and I think we learned the lesson. I think we should encourage any attempt for unrest in Iran. We should help our Azeri friends, but I should leave it to the Azeris, to Azerbaijan, to try to weaken Iran rather than to do it directly.
So no more
successful in
no more
kinetic.
Kermit Roosevelt, you mean? No more Kermit Roosevelt and Operation Ajax?
We have to be modest in our capabilities. How we should not extend ourselves too much.
No, I'm not saying Israel should do that. I mean, it didn't take very much of an American investment to carry out Operation Ajax. So there were no troops on the ground, et cetera. Obviously, in that case, there was a great deal of support for that in Iran among the army, et cetera, to carry that out. So we didn't need that much. There's a question about how Israel will be able to carry out the operation in Gaza. You said many months. Do you have any estimate for what Israeli casualties may be in carrying this out?
There will be a lot of casualties, according to the Israeli test. I cannot put a number, maybe a few hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yeah, we lost that number by a very limited.
No, I was expecting more.
I don't know. there is a paradox in doing this type of operations. You expect your commanders to be bold and at the same time to be cautious in order to spare the lives of their soldiers. And this paradox is not easy to solve. Also, we have to remember that there may be mistakes, and we should never underestimate the tenacity and the ingenuity of Hamas. We've seen a recent demonstration of a very effective plan, very sophisticated. Again, my son was called into duty on Saturday, and he is in a paratrooper reserve unit. He was in Kfar Aza, where there was a lot of fighting, and we communicated once in a while. And one thing he mentioned is the valor of the Hamas, their courage. They were courageous. They are courageous and fought to the very end, many of them. So we should not underestimate the capabilities of Hamas to exact a price from the IDF.
Okay, I think we've exhausted the questions. So I want to thank you again, Efraim, and I want to encourage people to go to the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security in order to, that's again, Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Efraim, you can give the website.
It's easy. It's www.jiss.org.
And there are many, many very interesting articles. Efraim has recruited an all-star bunch of researchers. I think Yaakov Amidror and Eran Lerman I see there, and many other top-notch people, some of whom we will probably be hearing from in the next weeks on this subject. So thank you again, Efraim, for a very incisive and informative briefing. And good luck to everyone.
We need good luck. All the best to you, and I applaud the work of the camera organization.
The feeling is mutual. Thanks very much, Efraim.